Merit is considered to be racist, to be unfair. Why has the word merit fallen on hard times?
It returns the emphasis to the individual, to how they think about their place in the world and plan for it, which the social justice warriors don't want any emphasis on the individual. They want the emphasis to be on state, the government, not even the sort of the church or the social organization, but actually the sort of coercive political power that they would like to see brought into play.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. As always, let's start with prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, through the intercession of St. Ignatius Loyola, we ask that you pour forth your Holy Spirit upon us, a spirit of discernment, that we might hear your voice and obey your command. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, friends, the academic year is over for most folks. People are evaluating somewhat critically what's happened with their children, with their schools, with teachers' unions, etc. And we're making some discoveries. During the COVID interruption, there were a lot of people standing over their kids' shoulders as they were having online education, and they heard things that startled them, and they want to know, what can we do? To help answer that question, I have a guest. He's a fellow at the Manhattan Institute and a contributing editor at City Journal. Charles Lehman, welcome to the Catholic Current.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Charles, what are some of the things that you've heard? Why are some parents anxious about what's taking place in school these days?
I think that there was both thanks to sort of the radical changes in how kids are being educated thanks to COVID, and also really due to last summer's protests, just a great deal of social upheaval in our schools. I think in particular, last summer's protests sort of, spread into the schoolroom. A lot of kids were energized by it, and that instigated maybe some positive changes, but certainly some disturbing changes where there's a great deal of pressure on school from kids, alumni, administrators to sort of embrace this new racial progressivism in a variety of ways, shapes, and forms. And so I think you're seeing schools from public school districts in North Carolina to hoity-toity prep schools in Manhattan really sort of lean into a new flavor of wokeness, critical race theory, whatever you want to call it, more so than ever.
Well, it seems to me that it's taken a lot of parents by surprise that, and they're using strange, the wokeness and critical race theory, which we'll get into in the next segment. But this isn't just something that started last week or a few months ago. This has been, I think, trickling down from higher education and is now in getting in local school districts. Is that correct? This isn't really anything brand spanking new, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think it's been going on in schools for a while, too. The DEI officers were once diversity officers. But it's certainly the case that the generation of campus activists who caused sort of such furor, uproar 5-10 years ago have now graduated. Some of them have become teachers, and so it's unsurprising that they bring the same set of ideas into the classroom.
Right, and it seems to me that there hasn't been a lot of pushback until now. On average, given your research, what is the typical parent's response to this? Is it, oh, good, someone's finally doing something about this, or is there a sense of alarm?
I mean, I think it varies. There are a fair number of parents feel that it's important for them to be doing something to respond to racism as a problem, to prejudice as a problem, and they see this offered as the solution. They say, oh, good, I'm glad. Indeed, they say, I'm glad somebody's doing something without looking closer. I think it's also the case that there are parents who are alarmed, who are saying, I don't like the idea that my kid is being asked to define himself by his race or his sex or his attraction to others. I don't like that kids are being separated by race. That conflicts with my values, with my sense of right and wrong. So I think, there were certainly many parents who are concerned, distressed, alarmed.
It seems to me the priorities, I'm scratching my head as I ask this question. I haven't heard a lot of ringing success stories that now that we've really nailed down helping students on average achieve excellence and math and reading and writing and science knowledge. Now we can really fine tune and get at those issues that have been neglected for so long. So this new way of teaching, this is not taking place in the context of we've already done our victory lap and the core issues. Now we're taking on peripheral issues. What's going on here? What can you infer in light of the priority that's been given to say critical race theory and wokeness rather than reading, writing, and arithmetic?
I think that there's a sense prevalent in our society that schools are the engine of change. That education is the place that we solve our social problems, and so it's a venue ripe for precisely the set of ideas that you're talking about. That this is exacerbated by sort of the motivation of some people who go into the profession that they see their job as changing kids' lives, and that's structured through a particular set of values. So it's not surprising to me that schools are sort of the next place that this conversation is happening, just because of the particular. Schools are not, for better or worse, are not just about reading, writing, and arithmetic. They are asked to play an enormous role in our society, and it's not surprising they're asked to take on this role too.
Friends, I'm speaking with Charles Lehman. He's a fellow at the Manhattan Institute and contributing editor at City Journal. We're talking about a toolkit for concerned parents. Again, I taught university for a number of years, and honestly, I started teaching in 1992. And while the gifted students were always gifted, and every year and place, it just seemed on average there's been a steady decline in the ability of university students to do university work in terms of motivation, discipline, reading and writing habits, intellectual curiosity, etc. I'm hard-pressed to see how that's what's taking place in grammar schools now is going to improve candidates for university life, say, in 4 or 5 years. Are my concerns misplaced?
I think a trend that is alarming to me is the increasing hostility to merit-based assessment and allocation of reward. You're seeing this, for example, at Thomas Jefferson High School, which is arguably the nation's #1 public high school. It's a magnet school outside of D.C. Same thing is true of the magnet schools in public magnet schools in New York City. Free schools that admit kids based on tests and are now embattled because many people want to get rid of those tests because they see their impact as racially disparate and therefore necessarily racist. If the purpose of education is sorting, if it is to decide who's going to lead our society, who the people who we're going to look to, we want those people to be the most meritorious, the people who have, among other qualities, sort of the most raw skill or dedication. And I see this sort of press to move away from merit-based assessment, testing, et cetera, will almost certainly be negative, have a negative impact on the quality of grads going forward. They will be, frankly, more likely to be selected not based on any sort of notion of racial preference, but be selected based on who can write the best essay or who can have the best out-of-school experiences. And those kids are not necessarily going to be the poor kids, the brown kids, the black kids.
It seems to me that I've read stories, and again, I just scratch my head, that grammar and standardized punctuation is racist, suggesting that there's one right answer to a math problem is racist. It's, if absolutely everything is racist, then nothing is racist. It's if everything is the color blue, you can't see blue because there's no contrast. Why is the word racism being bandied about so freely? I think to the point where it's almost being evacuated. I mean, there was a time when being called a racist was a very terrible thing that prompted an examination of conscience, but now it seems that everything is racist. What's going on here?
I think it's a sort of Motte Bailey where it is certainly the case that if you ask people who use the term freely, they will say they don't mean racism in sort of the horrible pejorative sense that you're alluding to, that it's a descriptive term and that's fine. Everybody does it and we just need to acknowledge it and move on from it. And yet simultaneously they will use it as a battering ram because the pejorative the sort of deeply harmful association. So, I think it's a rhetorical strategy. Simultaneously, you say, well, it's not so bad. We can use it all the time. And also you use it with its full force indiscriminately.
And it seems to me that there is no limits. I remember there was a Smithsonian exhibition that said things like punctuality and objectivity, etc. Those are racist too because they're the hallmarks of white culture. Do you have a sense that we're trending towards the bizarre? Is there anything that you say, well, for sure, that'll never be called racist? What are your thoughts on that?
You know, the document you're alluding to is based on a work called White Supremacy Culture by a woman whose name is Tema Okun. And I've always found it amusing that Tema Okun is white. That, you know, this woman who wrote the defining document on all of these crazy ideas being this crazy idea that like whiteness means being on time and doing hard work, and that's not racist somehow, is herself a white woman. No, I mean, I think, you know, there's this mode of analysis that's all encompassing of race. That's often quite lazy, and it's not surprising to me that sort of crazy things get lumped underneath it. It's not useful as an analytic approach, in my view.
Right. I think people. Yeah, we have a lot of clear thinking that needs to be done. And towards that, friends, when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Charles Lehman of the Manhattan Institute and City Journal. And we're going to be talking about defining terms. What is critical race theory? What are affinity groups? What is equity? What is implicit bias? These are things you need to know so you can evaluate the education that you're paying for in your school district. Remember, our rallying cry here at the Catholic Current is Christus Mundo, Mundus Christo, bringing Christ to the world and the world to Christ. We do it because our Lord says so, for the greater glory of God, the love of our neighbor, and the salvation of our own soul. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Let's keep the conversation going. Together we'll take it around the world. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Each weekday from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern, the Station of the Cross brings you Mother Miriam Live.
It is Christ's church. He will build it. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. But it's time for us, the remnant, to step up and do everything we can.
Tune in from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern for Mother Miriam Live on the Station of the Cross and our free iCatholic Radio mobile app. You can also watch the video stream every day on Facebook or on YouTube.
You're listening to The Catholic Current with Father Robert Matejk from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Stay connected with the show, our guests and topics, by following the show on Twitter and Gab. Just search for The Catholic Current.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert Matejk of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. I'm talking with Charles Lehman. He's a fellow at the Manhattan Institute and contributing editor at City Journal. He's put together a resource kit for parents who are concerned about the culture of wokeness and the paradigm of critical race theory becoming propaganda in schools. Charles, I want to define terms. I know that critical race theory it's a kind of extension of Marxist cultural analysis, isn't it? Marx wanted to reduce everything to class conflict. Critical race theory looks at everything through the prism of racial conflict. And it seems that there's one set of bad guys who happen to be of European descent, and the victims is everybody else. Is that a fair summary of critical race theory?
Yeah, you know, I think yes and no. And different. You know, there's disagreement about this on the left and on the right. What I like to say is, first, to your point about Marxism, it is true that there's sort of the oppressor-oppressed dynamic recapitulates Marx's capital labor distinction, although it's, I think, importantly true that, you know, you can't do modern sociology without recapitulating Marx. He's just sort of a guy, so he's in there everywhere, for better or worse. But I think, you know, critical race theory is really, as an academic discipline, as sort of a set of ideas that emerged in the 1980s, first in law schools and then propagated through other academic institutions, is really sort of a critique of the post-civil rights era dispensation, where many scholars look at the status of Black Americans following the Civil Rights Act, following the Civil Rights Movement, and note that they have not yet caught up in terms of achievement, economic outcomes, welfare, whatever, to white Americans, and take this as prima facie evidence that racism runs far deeper in American society than just the institutions the Civil Rights Movement overhauled. And that, in fact, white supremacy is the constitutive principle of American society. That no matter what changes you want to make, they will always end up indirectly serving the interests of the white majority and perpetuating the oppression of Black people. So that's sort of the ground claim about society that's central to CRT as an academic discipline. I do think it's important to emphasize, critical race theory in sort of the current conversation is often used in a more all-encompassing fashion to include ideas that are both connected to that particular academic school and then also to a bunch of sort of adjacent ideas that have gotten tacked on over the years or are propagating. They're clearly informed by critical race theory but aren't necessarily what the original critical race theorists would have associated themselves with.
Now, had we but whirled enough in time, I would go off on a tangent and talk about Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society and the welfare state actually destroying the Black family, which Daniel Patrick Moynihan had warned against, and he was denounced as, well, racist, and et cetera. But that'll be another topic for another time. I know you refer to something that's called the achievement gap, that it seems that certain groups and classes of students don't seem to be excelling and progressing in basic skills as others. It's fair to ask, why is that, and what can we do about it? But it seems that the explanations tend to be towards the sinister. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's right. And the achievement gap is a subject of great frustration in education circles. It's pick your metric of school success. You will find large disparities between whites, Hispanics, and Blacks, whether it's graduation rates, SAT scores, other national standardized test scores, dropout rates, whatever number you prefer to use, you'll find these large and persistent disparities. We've been trying to close the achievement gap for decades and decades in this country. We've had some success, but often it's halting and goes away. I think there's an interesting argument to be made that the moment that we're experiencing now with this sort of frustration with even achievement-focused rhetoric altogether comes out of some of the failures of prior school reform efforts to actually close the gap and the collapse of those institutions, groups like KIPP or Teach for America, their sort of absorption by progressive ideology. But I think, why is there an achievement gap? It's a really hard, possibly unanswerable question. I think it's actually less important to talk about sort of the fundamental root causes and to more importantly say, what can we do to address the achievement gap? There are certainly tools that we have that work. There's still a huge fight in this country about the correct way to teach reading, and we're pretty sure we know the right answer, which is phonics. And a lot of people don't use phonics, and that's an issue. But I think the CRT position is that simply talking about an achievement gap is racist. That really it may reflect differences of sort of different notions of intelligence, or that the achievement gap is not only primarily but exclusively a product of societal racism, and to attribute it to anything else is prima facie racist.
Friends, I'm speaking with Charles Lehman, a fellow at the Manhattan Institute and contributing editor at City Journal. We're talking about problems in public education and a toolkit for parents. Charles, one of the vocabulary that you go through is fascinating, and I think affinity group is pretty easily understood. But culturally responsive teaching, I understand that's kind of the cutting edge of this kind of pedagogy. What does that mean exactly?
So cultural responsive teaching is really sort of a grab bag. Nobody's totally sure what the most precise definition of it is, but really it's the idea that kids bring different cultural contexts to the classroom. And so to succeed at teaching kids from diverse backgrounds, you need to sort of work within their cultural norms. And on the one hand, there's something to that idea that like you want your classroom to be accessible. But on the other hand, I think that often means frankly, sort of racist assumptions about what minority kids' cultures look like that, minority kids can't be expected to be on time to stuff. because that's just their culture. This is the sort of idea that gets propagated in elite academic circles that I think has no grounding in reality. And B, just as there's an importance to meeting each kid where they are, there's also an importance and value to uniform high expectations, the belief that every kid has the capacity to succeed in some way, shape, or form, which I think gets lost in sort of that the culturally responsive teaching model sort of insistence that kids are intractably different from one another.
There was a phrase, I think it's called the soft racism of lowered expectations. That somehow you just have to resign yourself to the fact that certain groups or types of people can't do this or aren't good at that or shouldn't be asked to do A, B, or C because they don't value it. That really doesn't have the child expand himself. It doesn't help him stretch his capacity. There's no effort to take what's potential and make it actual. Isn't this is destructive, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think even from a very practical perspective, like it or not, in the 21st century American workforce, people are expected to be on time. People are expected to conduct themselves in an orderly fashion. People are expected to follow certain rules and norms. Paulo Freire, who's an influential pedagogical philosopher, talks about sort of the industrial capitalist model of education, where kids sit in a classroom and get lectured and taught to be good workers. And I think you can have ivory tower debates about that all night, but part of the function of a classroom is to teach kids how to be good members of society and how to be good workers and to give them the skills they need to be successful in life. And if we're saying, no, it's fine, your bad behaviors are actually just a product of your culture, and I'm going to meet you where you are failing to prepare them to live in the world as it actually exists, which I think is the first and foremost responsibility of teaching.
Right. I think we have to ask what are we equipping children for? And it seems to me that this paradigm is equipping some children, at least, to be indignant, to be sullen, and to be suspicious of anyone who achieves. And that, I think that is a disaster. Another word that's gained currency recently is equity. Equality is something you more readily perceived. What's meant by equity?
Yeah, I mean, I think equity really just means equality of outcomes in its most basic sense. Equity means, both terms are often used interchangeably and have sort of shifting definitions. But in the sort of progressive Kant, equality means equality of opportunity, and equity means equality of outcomes. And the view of many people is that we should pursue equity rather than equality. That just putting everybody at the same starting point is not enough. That it's important to ensure that all of the outcomes are equitable across or are equivalent across racial categories in a way that is not necessarily going to be in line with what the merit-seeking outcome looks like.
But no one suggests that when I try to play basketball. I just find that surpassing strange. Implicit bias. Apparently, you're hateful and you're racist and you're phobic, and you have to be taught that you are, because otherwise you wouldn't know these bad things about yourself. Is that a fair summary of what implicit bias is about?
Yeah. So the fascinating thing about implicit bias. So sometimes critical race theory proponents will talk about "quote unquote" structural racism, and what the term means, and I think it's an interesting, compelling idea, is that even if nobody harbors racism in his heart, there can be practices, norms, rules built in that perpetuate unfair, unjust outcomes. If you live in a neighborhood that laws that were created years ago that determine property values, those laws are created by people with racist intentions, that can hurt you in a racially inequitable way, even though nobody intended to. The crazy thing about implicit bias is that it sort of goes, well, there isn't a lot of explicit racial prejudice anymore, but there's still inequality of outcomes. So the problem must be that people have implicit prejudices, and that's what they're doing. They're carrying out these implicit ideas. So what you do is something called an implicit association test, where you have people, basically you flash images in front of their eyes and you get them to, map pictures to concepts. And the idea is if you map white people to good and black people to good, white things to good concepts, black things to bad concepts, you have an implicit bias. Good analyses suggest that these tests don't actually measure explicit racism, so their value as like a measure of implicit racism, to the extent that that's a real and determinative thing at all, it suggests that they're not very good measures. But the idea has persisted, and I think determines a lot of sort of our obsession with this therapeutic seminar, training, lecture series, this idea that deep down everybody is racist and we need to work to expunge that from ourselves at all times.
Right. And that, and you know what? If I were the diversity, inclusion, and equity officer, I would never have any incentive to say my work is done here. We've achieved. We've enough. So I think there is there's an implicit incentive to find more and more subtle forms of grievance that people never even dreamed of. Friends, when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Charles Lehman of the Manhattan Institute. In the next segment, we're going to talk about a toolkit for parents who are concerned about what's going on in their schools and their school boards. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcasts. Wherever you can find audio, you can find us. Follow the channel, write a 5-star review. We need to attract the attention of the algorithm so we can get these conversations going around the world. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
This is The Catholic Current from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Catch up on an episode you've missed or share them with your family or friends. The Catholic Current is podcasted wherever you enjoy listening: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. I'm speaking with Charles Lehman. He is fellow at Manhattan Institute and a contributing editor at City Journal. We're talking about a toolkit he's developed for parents who are concerned about what's being taught in their children's schools. Charles, suppose someone say, "Hi, Johnny, Sally, what did you learn in school today?" And he says, "Well, I've learned that I'm a bigot and that I shouldn't be concerned about math. I should be concerned about becoming an activist for anti-racism." That's probably going to generate a conversation at home. What does a parent do next?
So sorry, just to give a little context, there were lots of parents who were asking that question, lots of parents to whom I have spoken, to whom others of my colleagues have spoken, who are basically saying, there's a bunch of crazy stuff being taught in my kid's school. What do I do about this? Manhattan Institute, where I work, as you mentioned, has put together this toolkit for parents. You can find it on our website. It's manhattan-institute.org. I think, the toolkit is basically comes in 3 parts. There's sort of a contextualizing table setting essay. There's a glossary of terms that you may hear bandied about that you're not familiar with. We talked about that in the last segment. Mm-hmm. And then, there's guidance for parents on thinking about how to respond, how to push back, because really the only thing that parents can do is stand up and make their voices heard. And they're already starting to do this. There are videos from parent-teacher PTA meetings, from school board meetings. There are people who write public letters. There are people who have put things in the press. This is happening all over the country. So, the first piece of advice that I give to parents when I talk to them is you have to find other like-minded parents. You have to, maybe you already know them. Maybe you have to go outside and yell really loudly so that they can find you. Maybe they're yelling so you go find them. You got to find 3, 4, 5 other parents and get together as a group. That's sort of the most important step, because at the end of the day, this stuff is it's not a grassroots phenomenon. It's not being pushed by the majority. It's being pushed by administrators and a handful of students and a handful of alumni who are wielding rhetorical weapons that are very powerful, but are not themselves a particularly powerful voice. They can be drowned out by a sufficiently loud and angry group of parents who wield and who in our system are designed to wield disproportionate power. So that's really the first step, is find allies, and that's from there, you begin to organize.
All right. And I've seen a number of videos where parents go to school board meetings, and it seems the school board members are indignant that the parents are there at all and have the audacity to ask questions. What's motivating these school board members, and why do they react with such indignation when parents express concern?
School boards are a funny thing. They're a weird American institution. Like many weird American institutions, they're formally democratic and informally highly selective. Most people don't vote in their school board election, or if they do, they don't know who they're voting for. Mm-hmm. And so I think people who sit on school boards are often the sort of person who is highly selected for being an activist, being who believes themselves to be pursuing social justice and the general progressive good. And they are not used to being scrutinized because nobody really pays attention to their school board. But now parents are paying attention to their school board because the structure is designed to be democratically accountable, very democratically accountable, as it turns out. Which is why parents are showing up, and which is why school board elections are starting to turn away from these sort of ultra progressives and to more sensible parents. So I think they're shocked that democracy, which is technically built into the system but hasn't been operating, they're shocked that democracy is working all of a sudden.
Right. Supposing you have a group of parents and they're concerned and they say, all right, next month there's going to be a school board meeting. We need to go there. What can concerned parents do? What should they be doing? What steps should they take so that they're ready to go at the next school board meeting? If you were leading a group and you had a month to get ready, what would you have them do?
I think the first and most important thing is show of force. That means thinking critically about A, who can be there, B, who's going to speak. It's valuable to showcase a diversity of voices. The movement against CRT in schools is not just a conservative thing. Liberal parents are concerned about it. White parents, black parents, brown parents, Asian parents, Hispanic parents, you name it, they're concerned. The thing, too, is to think very carefully about your criticisms. We can talk all day about the ideological origins of this stuff and the Marxists and the Frankfurt School, but nobody really cares about that. No school principal cares about that. In my view, the most persuasive arguments are, one, does this stuff work? Because overwhelmingly the answer is no. There's very little evidence for the claim that it works. Two, why are you spending my money on this? Pointing out that if your school district, as some school districts have done, if your school district hires Ibram Kendi to give an hour-long lecture, that'll run you $20,000 to $25,000. If you hire a diversity consultancy, that'll run you mid-six figures. Why are they spending your money on this? Why are they spending the money on
clearly in the wrong line of work?
Yeah, well, there you go. And then point three is what are the effects on kids? The most persuasive stuff in support of this, and I think it's a real argument, is kids who say somebody's prejudiced towards me, somebody's racist towards me. I think that's those are real harms, and we should be talking about how to deal with them. But the most persuasive argument against this stuff is it's not solving that problem, and also it's giving kids another avenue to bully each other. That my kid, my Asian kid, my Jewish kid, my whatever is being bullied because all the other kids are like, you're an oppressor, and we get to be cruel to you, because kids will take any tools available to be cruel to one another. Yeah. So seeking to highlight those harms, I think, is a very persuasive approach as well.
Friends, I'm speaking with Charles Lehman of the Manhattan Institute, and he's a contributing editor at City Journal. We're talking about his toolkit for concerned parents. And the toolkit, and you say when you get organized and you're going to start presenting to the PTA or the board, you have to have a positive vision. And I agree with that you don't want to just be irate. You don't want to be that parent who's always red-faced and pounding the table, because then people will tune you out, even if you're presenting a cure for cancer. What does that positive vision look and sound like, and how can parents be prepared to present it?
Yeah, I think that's right. I would say there are a couple of different factors, and what you want to do varies by school and varies by context. Ultimately, you do want to say both we condemn racism, but also we believe separately and unrelatedly in diversity of opinion, in diversity of thought and voice in our classrooms, that we don't necessarily want to foreclose the teaching of ideas. We want to make sure that kids are learning freely and that they're not forced to make progressive ideals the only thing that they think, to profess beliefs that they don't hold.
Right.
I think it is important. I have a number of different potential policies that people can think about adopting or not adopting if they want to sort of offer an alternative for dealing with racial issues in particular. I think it's valuable to be willing to say racial animus is real, prejudice is real in our schools. Kids do unpleasant stuff to other kids, and we should have no tolerance for that. There's a good argument. We talked in the last segment about culturally responsive teaching. I think a lot of culturally responsive teaching, in some senses, comes down to limits on role models for black kids. There aren't enough black teachers. There's real good evidence to support the idea that black teachers help black kids and don't hurt white kids. I think it's a thing that you can support that's much less crazy than having white teachers talk about African patterns, which is something culturally responsive teaching advocates for. And I think, you want to think about a positive vision of racial diversity. People who are critical of CRT don't believe that we shouldn't talk about America's history of racism. We should talk about white supremacy. It's bad. We should talk about that history. But we should also, I think, center our discussion of race on positive role models. We should say, here are the great Americans, white, black, Hispanic, Asian, whatever category you want to put them into. Here are the great Americans of all stripes who have made our country the country that it is, and try to teach kids to be proud of who they are rather than using race as a tool to divide kids against each other.
Right. I mean, there is, I think there's a reason people still are trying to pour into this country from every direction. And it's not because they want to be a victim. It's because there's opportunity for achievement that you can't find elsewhere. I know that we live in a very, very interconnected world. I mean, there was a time where you could take a few days and then write a sternly worded letter to the editor of the newspaper. And if you mailed it on Monday, you might see it in print on Saturday. Those days are long, long behind us. I think savvy parents have to work with media. They also have to work with social media, and not just for the distribution of information, but for the garnering of support. What do parents need to know about working with media and social media if they're going to push back and have their concerns addressed at school board meetings?
My first piece of advice is that there's a spectrum and there's a trade-off. You can launch. It's easier than ever to launch your own news source. You can get on Twitter, you can get on Substack, you can get on Facebook, you can have a newsletter, you can do almost anything within 5 minutes and the click of several buttons. The value of that is that it gives you a platform you totally control. The cost of that is that probably no one will read it. This is sort of the most social media accounts do not have great reach. If you decide to engage with the traditional media, you will be making trade-offs. On the one hand, you will have a larger platform to speak from. On the other hand, the message will not be your own anymore. You'll be working with a journalist. So you want to think critically at who that journalist is. Local media is often your friend. Local media is really interested in controversies with two sides. They want to tell local stories. Frankly, I think local media is less monolithically woke than much of the mainstream national media. And so you may be more likely to find an ally there. You can conceivably work with mainstream national media, but they are often going to be critical. And if you doubt that, you should look at coverage of my colleague Chris Rufo in the Washington Post recently, which just ran a hit piece on him. Clearly, they know which side they're on. You can also think about working with conservative outlets. I'm an editor at City Journal, which is an outlet affiliated with the Manhattan Institute. I used to write for the Washington Free Beacon, which is another right-leaning outlet. The plus to that is that they are much more likely to be interested in your story. The minus to that is that we are, obviously come from an explicit partisan slant, and so that may be alienating to people. So, weigh those values, weigh those factors, and figure out what approach works best for you. If you do want to talk to traditional media, my best piece of advice is to come to them with as much information as possible. If you make the story easy to tell, journalists will tell the story the way you want them to.
Right.
But don't be surprised if you don't get everything that you want, because again, it's not totally your story anymore if you give it to somebody else.
Right. How about legal action? What's the role there?
That's really early days right now. There are a number of groups that are focusing on it. I think there are a number of sort of early lawsuits. There's one in, I think, Nevada. There's one in Virginia. Look, in general, I think there's a solid case to be made that segregating kids by race or compelling kids to profess certain views, or as one school district in Evanston, Illinois, telling parents that non-white kids will be allowed to come back to school first after the end of lockdowns. There's a strong argument that all of this stuff contravenes the plain language of the Civil Rights Act, which guarantees colorblindness in most public affairs. Will the courts see it that way? We don't know yet.
Right.
But I think it is a fruitful avenue, and one that at this point I would encourage most parents to keep their eyes very closely on.
Right. I think we have to follow those stories closely to see how they're presented and what the court is willing to hear and what the court is not willing to hear. And legal action it's not only time consuming and energy consuming, it's expensive, so you have to choose wisely. Friends, when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Charles Lehman of the Manhattan Institute. He's also contributing editor to the City Journal. We're talking about a toolkit for concerned parents who are worried about propaganda and racism being foisted upon their children in education. In the next segment, we're going to talk about what to do next and how to find allies. That's an important part of the conversation. Follow what we're following by following us on Gab. That's gab.com. Our channel is The Catholic Current. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Let's keep the conversation going. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
There's no better way to start your day than with spiritual formation from inspiring priests.
God says that the essence of marriage is a lifelong partnership and a covenant relationship, a sacred relationship between a man and a woman, ordered to the good of the spouses and to the procreation and education of children.
That's Sermons for Everyday Living, weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross.
After today's broadcast, go to the Catholic Current show page on thestationofthecross.com for info on today's guests, the show resource links, and to sign up for our weekly email of upcoming shows.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. I'm speaking with Charles Lehman. He's a fellow at the Manhattan Institute and contributing editor at City Journal, author of a toolkit for concerned parents who are worried about what their kids are being taught in school. You know, very often people say, well, what can I do? I'm just one person. I don't know where to start. There are organizations that they can turn to, that they can ask for help. Can you tell us about some of those, please?
Yeah, there are organizations popping up every day, literally since we put out the toolkit. New ones have gotten started. There are a couple that I like to recommend to people. One is an organization called Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. They're at fairforall, FAIRFORALL.org. And they're a membership organization. They're sort of a jack of all trades in this space for both schools, workplace, higher ed, you name it, interested in, free speech, free thought, and pushing back against what they call neo-racism in schools. There's an organization that I like a lot called Parents Defending Education, which is focused in particular on schools and in particular on particularly in legal action at the moment. That's defendinged.org. And PDE, I think, they're another good resource. The value of both of these groups is that in particular they will do work to help connect you to other parents if somebody else has expressed interest in your area. I also suggest there's an organization called the Pacific Legal Foundation, which is a public interest law firm that has taken some interest in discrimination cases associated with critical race theory. So that's another group of people to be aware of.
Well, and we're going to be linking to all these in our audio, our resources list for today's show. Going forward, do you think that there's momentum gathering, that as people wake up to wokeness, they're saying, this isn't for us. This isn't good for our kids. This is not more bad. Do you think that there is momentum moving against the woke movement in schools?
Yeah, absolutely. And on the one hand, I am pessimistic because we seem to have gone so much further than 20, 30, 40 years ago. The arc is sort of towards wokeness. But on the other hand, I'm optimistic because it really does seem like parents are waking up and taking notice. And parents are one of the most powerful forces in American democracy. They have a vested interest in a way that activists don't, which is they're interested in the well-being of their children. They would do anything for their kids. And so, I think that's a powerful force to have on my side.
Right. And I think, too, that there is strength in numbers, and to be reminded, well, I'm really not alone in this. I think that's a very, very important message. In your own work with the City Journal, what stories are you following? Where do you think, better said, how do you think these issues are going to continue to unfold across the country?
I'm most interested in school board elections right now, which I think are an under-discussed, under-attended venue for change. The average school board election costs $10,000 to $20,000, which is a lot out of my pocket, but fundraising from 200 other people, that's $100 a head. You can do that.
Sure.
It's chump change in a political campaign. But most people don't pay attention to school board election, which means it is ripe for somebody to step up and make an aggressive move. Ian Rowe, who's a scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, a charter school founder, someone with whom I've corresponded a little bit, just won a school board seat in Pelham, New York on an anti-CRT. I don't think he'd put it that way, but I put it that way, anti-CRT platform, just as one example. So, I think there's a lot of possibility for leverage in that domain that people are just sort of starting to wake up to. I analogize it to George Soros realized that it just doesn't cost that much money to buy a local district attorney's race. You can drop $500,000, which is nothing to him, and have a radical progressive be installed as district attorney in major cities across the United States. It's not that hard to do the same thing from the opposite flank for school boards. It's arguably much cheaper.
Going forward, if you say, all right, look, there really are some unfortunate results in public education. There really are groups of kids who are being underserved. And we've certainly spent, bunches of money trying to fix it. Throwing money at the problem doesn't work. What do you think can improve, say public schools in major urban areas, which historically have been in difficulty for a very long time? What would you recommend?
I will say education policy is not my area of expertise. I am sympathetic. We at Manhattan are sympathetic and strongly supportive of school choice, of charters, of any institution that allows competition in the education market. Mm-hmm. I am, in some senses, something of a policy pessimist in most regards. I think that people tend to overstate the amount of power that policy has to change the world, and some of these problems are more intractable than we like to believe. The root causes of inequality in schools begin before schools, but I certainly think that more competition is likely to be helpful at the margins.
Right, and I think that that's going to be an uphill battle, because isn't it the case that public teacher unions see school choice and vouchers, et cetera, in charter schools? They see that as an existential threat, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. This is as I alluded to earlier, the school reform movement has sort of in many ways been consumed by the larger progressive institutions. KIPP, one of the most successful charter schools and charter school organizations, recently disclaimed its own. I think its slogan was something like "Work hard, be nice." They said that that slogan's racist. We're not going to use it anymore because it's racist to ask black kids to work hard. Apparently. So I think they've been successful in their offensive there, unfortunately. And they do see it as a threat. As a parent, I am more concerned about my child's well-being than I'm concerned about their paycheck, but that's me.
Well, yeah, there is that as well, and I also think that we need to be willing to consider the possibility that families have something to do with education. And I know there was a story in Australia where they wanted to encourage families to not read to their children before they go to school, because then they would have an advantage, having been read to, over kids who are not read to. And somehow that's not fair. I don't know how to respond. How does an intelligent person make a statement like that? I'm not sure.
Ideology is a powerful thing. Is all
Apparently,
I can say. Yeah.
Apparently, it is. Yeah. It doesn't make a great deal of sense to me why people would do that. We've got about a minute left. What gives you hope? We're dealing with this difficult, intractable issue. What gives you hope?
As I alluded to earlier, I'm hopeful about parents who are willing to take action. I spend so much time talking to parents who say, essentially, I'd like to do something, but I feel like I can't on my own. Right. And it's nice to see that there are parents who are coming together and working as a group, because that's really all you have to do. You just have to take that first step, and then everything else is easy after it. And I do think that more generally in the problems of education, I do think that there are tools that we have that we know work that we aren't using yet. There's this big culture war fight, but we do have tools for getting kids to read better and to do math better. We know how to do that. And so I think that there's ground that can be made up if indeed we get past the sort of culture war issues, although I'm not optimistic about that.
Right. I think that if we really loved our children, maybe we wouldn't use them as pawns in political conflicts. Charles Lehman of the Manhattan Institute, thank you for being a very fine guest. I look forward to reading more of your work in the future and our next on-air conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much again for having me on.
I'm Jesuit Father Robert McKay, your host here every day at the Catholic Current. Join us tomorrow. Welcome back, Kennedy Hall. We're talking about church and state in Canada. We've got some amazing facts to review for you. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcasts. We need to keep these conversations going. Together we'll take them around the world. May Almighty God bless you. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, go in peace, and please pray for me.
Thank you for listening to this podcast brought to you by thestationofthecross.com, a listener-funded nonprofit organization. If this podcast has helped you in your spiritual journey, please prayerfully consider donating at thestationofthecross.com by calling 1-877-888-6279 or through our free iCatholic Radio mobile app.